Mac Miller. Mac Miller. Mac Miller. Mac Miller's final album is officially here. Been out for about a week now, and I have let it soak in so I could prepare for this review. And let me say, this album did have me a little surprise, little things that I was expecting. But nonetheless, it is a good closer to the Mac Miller discography. For those who don't know, Mac Miller is an American rapper who kind of started rising in the mid 2010s and kind of had a good style. But towards the end of his career, he started to switch it up a little more R&B related on the album Swimming, and he unfortunately passed away towards the end of 2018. And he never got to release this album, Circles. But, the album was already in the works, and they decided to finish it up and release it. And I do want to talk a little bit about that. I am a huge fan of Lil Peep and XXXTentacion, and I'm not a huge fan of what they have done after their deaths. I think that the most recent X album, Bad Vibes Forever, as well as the Lil Peep compilation, Everybody's Everything, is a really bad representation of the artist. I've left my fan on again. It's a bad representation of the artist, and I'm not a fan of how the labels, in many instances, take advantage of the artist's death to release albums and make more money. But I don't get that feeling from this Mac Miller album. I want to start off by talking about the instrumentals on this album. I think that overall, this album is full of pretty strong, very low-key instrumentals. I like most of the songs, instrumentals on this thing. I think that it's relatively strong, and I think that it has a very vulnerable sound to it, while also being very concise, and I very much appreciate that. And I think it's a better improvement from what he had done on his previous album in terms of making good R&B soft instrumentals, which I feel sound much better here on Circles than they did on his previous works. Another thing I want to bring about is the vocal performance on this album. It's very, very odd. It's very much close and up and personal. There isn't much effects on his voice at all. It's very much as if he's right here. He's right here, singing right to you, and almost right in your ear. And it has the positive is that it makes this album way more emotional, and it gives it much more feeling and much more impact. The downside is that it's pretty much like this on every single song, so I will say it does get a little bit repetitive after a while. That's really the only downside to it. I think that vocal performance, he's not the greatest singer in the world, but this kind of production on his voice definitely brings an extra level of valence to this album. But it does sometimes get a bit obnoxious when you hear it every single song, but that's just what happens when you listen to an album many, 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 many times. The song Good News, I already had... I haven't. I thought I reviewed it, but I didn't. But it is on my 2020 playlist already. I think it's one of the best songs that I've heard so far this year. Great tune. There's a reason why it made Anthony Fantano cry. But the song Circles is the opener here. And it's funny. It's not a cover, or it's not an original. It's not the Post Malone song. Although I do like that one a lot, too. One of the best ones of 2019. Yeah, this song continues from a lot of what I like of Good News. The instrumentals are nice. The vocals are what I would expect at this point. I like the way they're just very personal. That's another. And two of the other songs that I enjoy quite heavily off this album are Complicated and I Can See. And these follow the same kind of things. I feel like these songs are the best representation of the album. I like the way that he I don't know. It's very to the point. There's not much messing around. There ain't much ambient production. The instrumentals are very small. They're very relatively quiet, and his voice is right next to you. And it gives it a creepy, eerie vibe. And I think these songs are all great examples of this of this style that he was experimenting with on this album. I do find the song Hands to be a little corny. I'm not too crazy about that one. That's probably my least favorite on this album. But, one thing I appreciate about the entire album and listening to it as a whole, as a listening experience, is the overall vibe. This album has decent songs. Some are better than others, but most of them average around being okay. But the vibe is really good here, and it definitely puts you in the zone. And and I think it's a smart move on his part. I definitely like the way that he approaches all this stuff. But I've been pretty positive here. I haven't said much negative. And this album does have its flaws. I think part of the flaws for me, and a lot of it comes from the song Hands, and not the song, but the flaw of like the corniness and the cheesiness and the cliche stuff that I talked about on Hands. There are many songs where this kind of sneaks its way in there, and there also are some songs I just can't really see having much replay value for myself. I know a lot of that has to do with just me, but in general, I think that this album, I can't see this album aging the greatest, and I say that because, it's a final album. People are going to be anticipating it because he's passed away, and that's the rightful reason. But I think that most of the songs average out of being decent at best, and I do unfortunately think that's not a good quality for an album that is going to last in the mainstream for a long time. All that being said, I think that the vibe and the overall feeling and the production, even if all the songs aren't wonderful, definitely boost this album up a little bit. And I definitely appreciate this album. I definitely do like the way that he approaches everything. And it's a great final album, and a good bold move, and I really just want the labels to take this example, if you're for Juice WRLD, okay, Juice WRLD, he passed away. They just announced they're gonna release albums of his that he has been working on. Please follow this example. Keep the songs the way they were intended. This album, the Circles album, it may not be my favorite, but I definitely like it. I enjoy the album, and I like how the label kept true to what Mac Miller would have wanted, which is why I settled on giving this album a strong 7. Now, a strong 7 may not seem great to everybody, especially to some of the more positive reviews of this album, but I give it a strong 7 because I don't think this is the greatest thing. I think there's a lot of flaws, but I don't give it a 6. I definitely do not give it a 5. This album is strong. It's stronger than a lot of the other things I've heard so far this year. It's definitely up there with the Eminem album. I'm enthusiastic, and that's why I saw it on a strong 7. But labels, especially Juice WRLD's, listen to this album, how they kept it true to what Mac Miller would have wanted. Don't do what X's team has done. Don't just release a whole bunch of unreleased demos that were recorded on his phone and get a whole bunch of random artists to feature on it and completely wreck it. As far as I'm concerned, there was not one official feature, or at least none that I could notice, on this album Circles. So please, labels, just listen. And this is how you should make a posthumous album. But in the end, I give this album a strong 7. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Comment down below. I don't know what I'm going to be reviewing next. I need to look at some of the new albums that have come out, listen to them a bit, and maybe I'll do some old reviews, and I'm going to do some lists in the meantime. But for now, that's all. Goodbye.